Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. This is Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. This is Friday, June 5th, 2026. It's our office hours where you submit questions and we answer them. They're normal processes. So Francis leaves a link in the description underneath this video. You can follow that to a Google form where you insert your question. This gets put into some sort of list or spreadsheet or database. I don't know. These guys take care of it. Then by some magic process, they end up getting reviewed and filtered for quality. We really don't need to filter them. It's amazing. And then Martin puts in his draft of the answer, and since Martin's pretty much always right, I had depth and color. So, and the few things Martin and I don't agree on are more for the elaboration of the optimistic and pessimistic probabilities of the situation, which everyone knows about and is part of the charm of Martin and I working together. Anyway, today we have, how many do you think we're going to get through today? I think we're going to get through, I don't know, Suki's been here, so we know that if Suki's have submitted questions, they're not going to be easy. All right.
Well, I think none of the questions are easy. I can count maybe the number of questions that we just outright answered in a couple of minutes as being like maybe 1 or 2 out of hundreds. People don't come here for easy questions. They come here.
How many do we have now? How many do we have now?
Well, let me see. I think we might have just crossed the 400 mark.
Okay, so we've got quite a
We're
library.
Close. Oh yeah, we did cross the 400 mark. In fact, Suki's question would be 405.
Fantastic. So you'll notice that Martin has his microphone now, and hopefully okay, let me tell you this. Martin has like fancy studio quality desktop speakers, okay? So I didn't know this, which is fascinating to me, right? And so what we had to do is that we can't, Martin's voice range is so low that I have to be asking questions all the time. Martin, can you talk way down here for me, please? Can you talk? No. Anyway, so what we did is we managed to get him a microphone stand, and we managed to set the controls on the software that regulates the sound so that it would pick up his voice a little better. And we raised his speakers off the table, because when we fixed the sound like that, Martin came across with a little vibratory thunder that was a little ominous. And so that was it. So anyway, so can you say something? What was that?
Is that a bad thing?
That a bad thing?
You're stretching the capability of the microphone to the max.
Yes, it's fantastic. So and I want to comment on Francis. Is a very fancy gentleman, really. He lives in a very fancy house in a very fancy neighborhood. But I guess you're moving. Is that what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
All right, or some, and so his office is not usually is not at the. He is not living in a 1,200 square foot apartment in an office block somewhere. That's actually he's packing himself up. I'm trying to set you up here, Francis, and it's not working at all, is it? It's not working. I'm not getting anywhere.
You know, I was going to say this is the same office I've always been in for the last 10 something years. I just changed the angle of the desk.
All right, love you guys. All right, so as it usually works, Francis reads the question, Martin gives his response, and I add color and depth. The questions today are interesting, so let's get through them.
Okay, question 1 from our number 1 question seeker, or rather the number 1 truth seeker, Suki. This is a long question that needs a preface. Professor Jiang Xueqin, by the way, that is how his name is pronounced. I looked it up. An ethnically Han Chinese who grew up in Canada but now lives in China predicts the 2026 Iran war in YouTube video, Geostrategy number 8, The Iran Trap, on the channel Predictive History. And this video was uploaded on May 29, 2024. He's someone I've been watching for over a year now. A brief summary of the video. Forces pushes for war, AIPAC, and Christian Zionists who sees Iran as a security threat for Israel, the empire on Wall Street, who are addicted to empire because it allows for easy money and global finance speculations through the US dollar, and Saudi Arabia, which sees Iran an existential threat to the Saudi regime. And that Trump would prioritize war with Iran due to being influenced and being able to benefit from it by making Trump look good and maintaining the dominance of the dollar. He calls it Iran trap because it will essentially be a resource sinkhole for the United States, and this mostly benefits Israel and Saudi Arabia. He predicts a similar outcome to the Sicilian expedition by Athens, although he would not have predicted it because that was already history. And this is in part due to US hubris, and Iran will use persuasion via framing themselves to the world as benevolent victims fighting evil and using low-cost, flexible methods to defeat the US high-cost, rigid systems. He also mentioned that due to Iran's terrain, they cannot use shock and awe to defeat Iran because they can counter that with drone swarms to target aircraft carriers, and deploying troops and supplies via air on Iranian soil would essentially cause encirclement and supply chain problems. Again, due to the mountainous geography, making the war expensive, hard to finish, and the war effort ineffective for the US unless we use nuclear weapons, which Russia could prevent from happening by claiming that they will use them on the US if US use them in Iran. He claims that this will cause economic strain, exposure of US industrial production weaknesses, and the loss of credibility on the part of the US. This leads to my two questions. Sorry for asking a multi-part question, Francis. Apology accepted. Number one, will the blocking of Strait of Hormuz cause World War III, assuming Iran sustains that blockade? As far as I can see, nations will be incentivized to participate in the conflict, both Arabian Gulf nations, Gulf states, who export oil and import food, and those who need their oil, or else they would not be able to power their societies and collapse, or see the increased unrest without the oil that comes out of the Arabian Gulf. And two, do you all think this timeline could roughly be the way that the US enters into a heated civil conflict? He predicted that this would eventually result in massive economic strain via debt and the compromised value of the petrodollar, causing hyperinflation to pay off sovereign debt, which could cause very nasty consequences in the States, such as extirpation of the middle class, issues with funding, welfare, and other services, end of all institutional authority, likely besides the military, and the viciously heated 2028 election, and likely civil war if we're lucky, a revolution, which, if this timeline is credible, could happen around early 2028.
First, Jiang appears to be some sort of plant who gained a following out of nothing and is somehow promoted for saying things others got banned for a few years ago. There's little agreement on whether he's a Chinese or CIA plant, however. Now, what is described seems to me to be similar to a trend of people who were, and in some cases still are, predicting Russia's imminent victory in Ukraine and the rise of BRICS, the likes of Ritter, Mearsheimer, Escobar, etc. They were wrong about everything, and one theory is they were actually legitimizing using more force against Russia by portraying it as stronger, or rather less corrupted and subverted from the inside than it really is. That said, what I understand happened in Iran is that a similarly corrupt government was eliminated in the attacks and afterwards replaced by people who are actually serious about fighting. Thus, ZOG scored an own goal on this. Iran has been putting up more fight than Russia ever did. I still see no way for it to win, at most it can make the conflict costly for America. I'm not expecting a world war or civil war in the West, it's just another reason why everyone other than the oligarchy will get poorer, while the Judeo-American power still keeps growing.
You know, if you just added a vocal inflection to it, this would make a great comedy skit, because you just were that was pretty devastating, Martin. Anyway, yeah, what Martin said. So I'm when we discussed this question before we started the broadcast. What do you call it? Podcast, broadcast? What are we doing anyway?
Oh, I guess we're doing podcast.
Podcast. Before we started, I thought I would provide a pretty serious answer. We had some depth and explanation to it. But I think it's probably better to talk about. There's really two things to talk about. One is, why is there this demand for this kind of anti-American sort of narrative, right? Why does that?
People see what America is doing to the world and want hopium that something is going to change about it.
Right. So I understand that, and I would like to discuss that question, right? Because of course, this is a little bit like the generational problem of Strauss and Howe. It's that we have short-term cultural memories. And so everyone who comes to age in their coming of age period, which is usually in their teens to early 20s, that becomes their foundation, their basis of measurement for the world. And so if you come up in one generation, your foundation of measurement of the world is one thing, and then in the next group comes up and their comes into a maturity, into awareness, whatever you want to call it, during their period, and forms their system of measurement. So what happens is that each generation tends to treat their perception as the long-standing tradition rather than their generation's interpretation of the world as it is. And so what happens, of course, is this is why we forget things. Brandon and I certainly work on this in the law. We've been discussing this over the past couple of days. I wrote like 4 pieces on it recently. And so this is an ongoing problem of 2 factors. One is the rate at which the world is evolving compared to under agrarianism. And the second is the rate at which our institutions adapt, which is not very good, if I could say. And the third is the rate of narrative formation and reformation that produces a divergence, not only between cultures, but between generations, and sometimes, and then fragmentation within generations. So we've gone from having the usual class narrative that has functioned in humanity for most of our history to having on all sorts of narratives. And then social media, of course, became the vehicle by which we could, or the internet did, became the vehicle for which we could advance, become entrapped in, or come engaged in by those different divergent narratives. So when I hear the world say the world, this is whatever, I can remember when the world said, oh my God, no, we need this order that the US has created. And specifically, we need to not have the order that the fascists or the communists were producing. Or the world said, we don't want the order, like today, that the Muslims are trying to produce. So there's this problem of divergent narratives and divergent perceptions, and as such, divergent value perceptions of the world. And so what I see from my point of view is different from what Martin sees. Martin, correct. But I'm going to try to explain why that is. There is in volume 1, which you can't read yet because we haven't finished and published it yet. We explain the process of human civilizational evolution. Let's just talk about it from that standpoint, as a process of interaction or expansion, running into one each other, conflict, or it's not always conflict. It could be opportunity for trade or opportunity for conflict. Then what we see centralization, which you can think of as conquest or whatever, or alliance to conquest to merger, right? In that spectrum, alliance to merger to conquest, right? You could see that spectrum as producing a means by which the system of measurement is commonized across those populations, so that they can operate in non-hostile means by the same manners, morals, ethics, traditions, values, but most formally rights, duties, and obligations, right? That's whether that's authoritarian or whether that's natural, like in the authoritarian, which is really well done in China, or libertarian, which is it's done in the West, or the whole spectrum between those two. That's the rest of the world. And so this process of normalization, which is really the process of creating computability, right? Calculability is probably the more formal term, so that people can cooperate. Once that consolidation and centralization and normalization happens, now at some point, everybody gets to the position where there's advantage in defecting from it in order to benefit from what we generally call comparative advantage, some advantage they definitely have. So during this process of separatism, coming together, normalization, and then seeking advantage, right? Because normalization means essentially everybody's doing better. To diversification, or in other words, separation, you see this process of people humans going through 3 stages. Oh my God, we're in conflict. Oh my God, we are in opportunity. We have their optimistic reaction to this, one way or the other, whether both sides or one side, and then the eventual normalization of trade, the huge benefits of cooperation and trade at large scale, especially the military, defense, finance, and trade values of scale. And then once that's happened, and things are moving in some complexity, the administration of that group tends to break down for the reasons we see in our era, but we've seen in every era, is that the folks who run these governments become bloated, they become self-interested, and then likewise the individual parts of the empire, civilization, empire, federation, country. China's I love Chinese examples in this, because much easier to understand clearly than the Western, which always seems like chaos by comparison, or the Middle East, which is too obvious in this. They're too obvious in this central. So once we see this process happening, the people in each time period see what's going on, interpret the world differently. And so what's happening in our phase is we're going through the process of centralization, which was first the European age of sail that united the world turning into the European Age of Empires, followed by the suicide of those empires in the world wars and the death of aristocracy, followed by the Pax Americana, which is the attempt to prevent further world wars by uniting the world in trade. In other words, the economic benefits that became available in the Industrial Revolution made an incentive that no longer made territorial expansion the optimum for humanity. Instead, it was economic development.
There's no humanity. There are competing groups.
I understand, Martin. Right? Let me finish my arc, because I want to get to what I want to use it to illustrate how to take your position. So what happened is, of course, humanity during the Pax Americana, well, I mean, Pax Europa, maybe then Pax Americana, was radically raised out of ignorance, superstition, ignorance, poverty, disease, early death, child mortality, early death, disease, and even the vicissitudes of the hostile nature. So we have had a huge increase in that. And you can tell because the countries that were not settled by Europeans or colonized are still way behind the places that were, and the places that were already civilized but adopted European technology, especially rule of law and this kind of thing, tended to do better than even those countries. And the West still has done better until the pill and the female empowerment and the population collapse. So we're going through the normal centralization and decentralization process. And that's because, again, we have raised everybody to the position of empowerment to be able to seek advantage outside of the constraints that the USA has imposed by the Pax Americana. And this means that long-standing border disputes, largely over resources, but sometimes over populations, over the desire for self-government or the desire to not permit self-government, are being expressed by the world, right? That's a normal thing. And so I think I've almost got my arc made, Martin. So this concentration and separation, this is the heartbeat of civilization over time. This is how it works. So you couldn't think of the world like as a system like we do today in the ancient past. You could, or not very much so, but it's a system today. These things here, which I can't remember who it is who says it. I think it's Jiang. This takes 900 or 9,000
subcontractors.
Subcontractors to produce this.
Yeah.
Right. And it takes and the only way that it's cheap is that we have these massive ocean-going cargo vessels, and the standardization of the boxes that sit on them. What are they called?
Containers. Cargo containers. And that nobody is blowing them out of the water.
Right. And so we have relatively cheap insurance of these vessels, so they can afford to go out there. Right. So that's the real. So the thing that we have done.
Can I add one point?
Sure. Yeah.
So speaking of a cheap insurance for these vessels, right? Not container vessels, but once the war in Iran happened and they closed down the Strait of Hormuz, of course, oil tankers are no longer flowing. And I believe at one point Trump says that the United States will underwrite and escort these vessels. Well, unfortunately, we don't have that kind of ships, right? It requires frigates and destroyers, and we just don't have enough of them. We have more than enough aircraft carriers. And when one of these carrier groups is more than Air Force in some countries, and we have something like 11, they're always on rotating deployment. But anyways, besides that point, so at one point, the United States was going to underwrite that. And then even what I read is, interestingly, even after it blown away the speedboats and drone launchers and missile launchers and so on, even if the insurance companies are willing to underwrite, the captains still wouldn't, the companies that run these shipping, they still wouldn't send their tankers through because they are so dead afraid of getting anybody hurt.
Yep.
It just shows you how fragile it is. And so far, what did Iran even try to, I think Iran blow up one or two, right? All it took is like one or two, and they're not even sunk, to bring the entire global shipping order down to knees.
I know of one. It might have been two. I don't know the answer. All right. So I'm going to finish my arc. Thank you. That system, what I like you brought in is how fragile that system is, right? It takes a lot for the Pax Americana to do it. However, we have created the centralization, the raising to new levels of agency worldwide, right? And now we're seeing the expression of self-interest at the new level of international agency, right? People have agencies. Now, people express this agency dependent upon their perception of the world as it is, right? And so if you're in most of the world today, a couple of factors are occurring at the same time. There's been a rise of a competing China, right? Which does not necessarily want to hold the same values as the international order has.
And most definitely does not.
Right. You have Russia demonstrating it does not want to hold to those values. And you have Iran demonstrating it does not want to hold to those values. Now, hold on. The values being borders, rule of law, democratic government, and human rights. Now those were those rights. Was an optimistic expression of what could be achieved in the post-war era. That's what it was. That was a whole part of the strategy, which is how do we not have another world war? That's what was really driving everything. And how do we not have the Soviets win? Now then it became not have the Islamists win, and now it's become not have the Chinese win, right? And the answer, okay, so that's a normal evolution of resistance and opportunism by what have historically been empires that still seek imperial status, not the new world federation. All right, so okay, so I think I've got it now.
Martin looks like he's gonna puke.
I'm trying to get to where I can give it to him. I am trying so hard, right? But I'm like also trying.
I don't even know where to start with all this.
You better take notes so you can, rebuttal one at a time. All right,
let me get there. Okay, so the next problem that comes along is that we have seen people reassert their that, right? So we see that. But I think Martin's real objection is the more natural one, which is more common, which is that, hey, this centralization brought economic benefits, but it did not bring social and political benefits. In other words, international trade made these things cheap and available, right?
At the cost of civilization.
Well, that's a little bit of a reach, but at the cost of exactly what? And this is where you're right? I mean, this is where you're right all the time. My problem is that, that the conservatives in general, or in the left, and left is almost as much, tend to use hyperbola in order to illustrate a point. This is the general male strategy of in long-term outcomes. And I think what you're doing is you are correctly advocating for something, but you're not understanding or appreciating that your interest is one of multiple interests, and that the problem is then can we find a means of preserving the value of international trade with and the Pax Americana without the dominance of dominance and undermining of the civilizational norms, traditions, and values that make each country able to take care of its people in the fashion that they want to be taken care of. And that's how I would look at the problem. Is that whoever wrote over homogenization is actually
I'm trying to formulate my thoughts here. So go on.
So I see what's going on as a normal cycle of history. I see everybody's reaction as a normal counter reaction to a normal reaction to the cycles of history. This is just human. This is all biological orders at scale. We just happen to be cooperative, so ours is more complex and interesting. And I agree with you, Martin. I want my Little England back. That's what I want. I watch Scandinavian television and Scandinavian movies. That's what I grew up thinking was normal. Why can't I have that again? Why do I have to live in this multicultural hell? Right? It's not a race thing to me. It's just a cultural thing. Why can't I? What?
It may not be a race thing too, but it actually is a race thing.
Okay, no, I understand. I tend to think of it as I just want that order, right? I don't tend to see. I mean, it can be, it is, and maybe can be a race thing, but the way I perceive it is that's all. I was just giving my perspective on it. So yeah, I think you want to bring your thoughts in, Francis. Is that it? Is that
yeah. So while you guys are talking, Martin raised the question at the cost of what? And I thought that the cost is at the cost of over-homogenization and the ability for each distinct civilization to evolve along their own unique path, and i.e. true diversity. I'll give you an example. If you look at 19th century, by the end of the 19th century, right? End of the 19th century, Great Britain, United States, Scandinavian countries, India, China, and Japan. You see very distinct cultures reflected in the architecture, the way the society operates, etc. And you could say, and it's actually pretty easy for you to tell which civilizations have actually succeeded, judging by the metric technological and civil progress, right? Clearly, the West, led by Great Britain, won in that sense. And China and Japan, despite having evolved on their own paths, became stagnant. But they became stagnant measured on certain aspects, and yet not on others. If you just look at the architecture, you can distinctly tell varying differences. Mm-hmm. And then you fast forward 100 years. Everybody's cities essentially look the same. Well, in China, and I'm sure in Russia, since you've been there, there's this, you can see the imprint of communism. This very oppressive, grand, monolithic buildings, and like the Soviet 50s style apartment buildings that just like crushes your soul and so on. But even that, compared to say the Bauhaus style in Germany, and you could say the postmodernist style in the United States, even they look very similar. I.e., modernity has essentially put everything in a pot and stirred it and melted everything. So these days, Shanghai is, it's newer and shinier, but other than all the Chinese walking around with black hair. You could just, in fact, actually people did it. Right? Wasn't it the 2015 movie Her or something was actually shot in Shanghai? Except all the actors are Westerners, and just make it look like that a Western city like New York or something 50 years in the future. So that's the real cost. But the cosmopolitans may think this as a good thing. Of course, that the desert tribe may think that's a good thing, but it comes at a cost of this. Also makes this monoculture very susceptible to diseases that destroys it. If you have varying diversity, right, a true diversity, not just diversity of skin colors or whatever, but true diversity in terms of culture and thoughts and everything, then one catastrophe, one disease for one culture will not wipe everybody out. But if everybody is the same, if everybody operating in similar ways, then one quote disease can wipe everyone out, and we're seeing that. And this is what I believe: we're seeing that in the collapse of birth rates, which is homogeneous across, basically universal across all developed societies. And this is a psychological, what did Roger call it? The psychological Black Death. This is a civilization level disease that can wipe out all cultures, all modern cultures.
That's actually pretty right. That's a great analysis and compression.
So a natural result from all that, this collapse, and let's say even you look at let's use China, right? China's an example. The Western homogenous culture really just concentrated in places like Shanghai and Shenzhen and Guangzhou, Hong Kong, and maybe to a certain extent, Beijing, since Beijing is a centralized power. Yep. So when those, here I don't think of China as a single country, a single culture. It has many sub-ethnic cultures and many diverse cultures, even if you drive 200 miles out of Beijing. So once those imperial capitals, and in a sense, the cosmopolitan capitals collapse due to their own low birth rates, if nothing else, right, let alone war and so on, then it gives room for these other local cultures to thrive. Really, we're just talking about decentralization. Okay, I'm done.
I would say that everything Curt described as valuing about the Western culture is a product of the West as it existed before the World Wars, and some dying embers still existed during Curt's youth. That American post-war so-called order killed them.
That's possibly true. I can see that.
Culture requires order, and liberalism is the opposite of order.
You want to legitimize what you said, Martin, because otherwise it's dismissible.
Just give me a sec. The cat keeps annoying me.
The cat keeps following you? I'm not going to run with that. I think I think that the way I look at it is my family is what's called the lesser aristocracy. And that was practiced through my father. But you can't do it anymore because the post-war era, which looked at the Soviets and the Germans and their managerial state, which was, that's been predicted. This problem's been predicted since what's his name wrote the Machiavellians.
Burnham.
Burnham, yeah. Is that I don't feel that. I think the aristocratic tradition was probably killed by the bureaucratic tradition, suppressing it and replacing it, and the intervention of government into local governments on a degree that pushed out what would have normally been responsible citizens from governments and replaced them with bureaucrats. And so I think your argument is correct, is that in my lifetime I've seen this happen. I've seen what you
I would generalize that as decline of military power and replacement by merchant power. And that doesn't mean that there aren't strong militaries, but they're not sovereign. They're submit to the merchants.
Is it merchants? Okay, so usually you have three factors, right? You have what you would call the merchant or financial classes, right? You would have the bureaucratic or state classes, and you would have.
It still seems to me to fit into the merchant archetype. Out of Germany used to have military bureaucrats.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know.
It's just look at the leaders of countries, right? So,
right.
Germany, under the Kaiser, you have these military leaders, and you could even say that Hitler is a militaristic leader, came out of a military class because he was actually a private in World War One. And then who's our last president that was even in the military service? I can think of Eisenhower. I don't know about the others. Oh yes,
Bush
that's
2.
right. HW. No, Bush 1. Bush 2 was in the National Guards, and I think he was a draft dodger or something. That was a big stink.
Who was the pilot? No, we're right. I'm sorry, I'm confused them.
Yeah, Bush 1 was a Navy pilot during World War II. He was the last one, and by your account, right, he was probably the last good president or the president who actually knows what he's doing.
The most competent president.
Yeah. And now we actually have a president who's the very definition of merchant, although he went to military school.
He behaves like old aristocracy, really. He's just
he does.
using voice. He behaves like it. He definitely does, without question.
He actually behaves like the mixture of someone who, an officer who has men under his control and a mafia boss.
Well, I mean, you look at a lot of old work. If you look at we tend to look at aristocracy from the German princedoms, and they're small, right? The German princedoms were small. They didn't have a lot of power distance, right? So, but once you get to people who have power, they're more like mafia bosses. The same was true in the feudal era. The knights were a lot more like gangsters than they are pictured in our history. Our
history is whitewashed.
Yeah, very much so. So, I don't see that. But the point I want to get to, if we can, I'm sorry, is I want to get to Martin's criticism, because my view is that Martin, you are right, but I feel like, okay, the negative isn't the same thing. The criticism isn't the same thing as a solution. And I actually, other than writing it into your Constitution so that the governments can't play this fucking game that their peers in other governments are their actual customers rather than the citizens are their customers, which is what I think happens. And that we can't have mass democracy without some version of of what we would call aristocracy or military and industrial nobility, so to speak. I don't know how to bring it about, and it's not that it's taken me a long time to frame your. It's more than 8. It's like 6 or 8 months now, maybe a year that I've
subsidiarity.
What?
Subsidiarity.
Well, his subsidiarity. It's right. Martin's right. The principle of subsidiarity is what needs to be restored so that we can maintain the economic and technological benefits of scale without having the homogenization that is destructive to the social orders that make us actually feel like somebody gives a shit about us, so that we can actually give a shit about each other. So I mean, I totally agree. The problem is how to fucking bring it about.
I see even economic benefits have to be forfeited, at least to some extent.
Sure, I don't think it matters, because the whole trick in the industrial era was overcoming the long history of scarcity. We don't really have a scarcity today. What we have is a lot of consumption for the purpose of virtue, status, and self-image signaling, and that's all over the fucking place. Whereas, so if you were to say, okay, what would we want to do instead of that? You could do some of the stuff that the Europeans do, which is you could direct those profits to producing the things that people that are commons that are good for people. Whereas I think what the Europeans have done is they've made commons that people like but aren't good for them. In other words, just making it so you don't have to work and whatever when you that you don't realize you have to have kids to have those benefits. That's been pretty destructive. It's been destructive there and here. We just haven't fallen into
that's the ultimate hyper-consumption. Like, you're not even consuming to produce the next generation to propagate you. You're just consuming for the sake of consuming, for the sake of status hierarchy.
The commons have to come from the inside. The people actually have a sense of common interest. You can't have some EU commission.
You are correct, and Curt, you're asking how do you bring it about, and the way I'm kind of looking at it is nature run its course, right? Those who do not have children, they are eventually going to die.
Yep.
Another way nature will assert itself is scarcity hasn't gone anywhere. It's just an illusion. And if we'll continue with all this wasteful usage, then it will assert itself sooner rather than later.
It has been kicked. The can has been kicked down the road perpetually.
Yeah, well, that's what we were arguing. I mean, that's what that was actually the foundation of the conservative to libertarian argument during most of my life.
Libertarians do not recognize scarcity. I mean, they do recognize it's like in property, in how it's the distribution of scarce resources.
Right, there's again, we have Jewish libertarianism and we have Anglo-libertarianism, and in the Hayekian vein or the Anglo-libertarianism.
Okay, show me how.
Okay, guys, that's my fault. We're definitely diverging now. So, Curt, have you finished making your point?
I finished making my point, and I think it was a good time to cover the cycle of history and how all this is playing into it. My problem is it's took me a long time to understand what Martin was really trying for. And once he gave me subsidiarity to work with, I think that was extremely helpful. At this point, I understand it as merely we need to solve the problem of how to do it. I realize that there is always an urge to criticize the negative, which is the homogenization, of course, which I don't view as a European. I view that as the Jewish Marxist attempt, but and the progressive attempt. But I just want to find an answer to how do we produce this, and I think that's a set of reforms that we could actually organize, put into a document, and promote. But otherwise, I think that the issue is when most people hear that, they're not going to hear what we think they're going to hear unless we give them the explicit enough detail to counter their arguments. So I'm just worried that what they're going to hear is, you're trying to make me into the Amish, which was I was going to tease Martin about earlier.
No, that's too Jewish. We're not doing that.
Yeah, well, if only they could be Amish. I don't think they even.
So I was going to tease Martin that it's like the ludic agenda. When that's not really what he's saying. What he's saying is that what I think you're saying, Martin. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But what I think you're saying is that this whole consumer universalist, homogenist ambition is actually destructive for what makes our peoples distinct.
I do feel more visceral disgust seeing McDonald's and Starbucks here than those commie blocks.
Yes. I understand.
Well, I mean, they're really the same thing, in a sense. They share a very similar nature.
Coin, yes.
It's just it is a conquest by communist authoritarians or conquest by commercial authoritarians.
Yeah.
Commie blocks at least they were for people to live in. They had a point.
Yeah.
They weren't just conquest.
Martin, I assume you lived in one of those?
I spent a few years of my youth in one, yes.
I spent quite a bit of my childhood living in one of those. It's actually pretty depressing.
I lived in one of the blocks in Ukraine, and what I liked about it is what Martin likes about it, right? What I liked about it, well, first of all, it was one of those, ones that's been all redone and modernized, right? The apartment I lived in. What I liked about it was knowing my fucking neighbors.
Yes, that's definitely the community aspect of which I do miss. But the ones I lived in were not modernized, and it had a hallway with seriously like 25-watt bulbs because they couldn't afford the electricity. That in the middle of the day makes it look like a freaking black prison.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've done this one.
We spent an hour on it, but it was a pretty good.
Yeah,
it was a good one.
We spent most of the time on something completely different.
I'm answering its question.
So the part for Suki's benefit, this guy is, which I discovered, I just discussed with the guys before we started the video. He's just using the typical feminine Abrahamic Marxist sequence of creating of overloading the narrative, using of sedition by overloading the narrative, right? Using a critique, undermining.
Yes.
Right, and claiming special insight when honestly, who didn't predict the fucking war and whatever was going to happen? And we've just been waiting for it for the time. Well, we were always all we were doing was betting on whether the administration in Iran could outlast the sanctions and the demand for the population for freedom. But what happened was they used one of their proxies to against Israel. Israel said, okay, this is enough. Israel went in. We saw it as a chance to jump on top of getting rid of the nuclear weapons And now he's sitting there, Trump is saying, I'm gonna wait it out, and I'm gonna get the nuclear weapons and get them out of it, even if we can't rotate the whole leadership. So the answer, what I think is going to happen, we're going to get the nuclear materials, and then the fucking Israelis are going to keep just killing them one at a time until they're gone, until it destabilizes even further. That's what I think is going to happen.
But by the way, just for the benefit of the audience, what Curt was referring to is this professor in quotes, because as far as I know, he's not a professor in any accredited university. This Professor Jiang is using the Abrahamic method, which after listening to a few of his episodes, I kind of instinctively picked out that there's something not quite right about this guy. But I'll give credit to my daughter. Without knowing all the science that we do here, she refused to listen to the guy because, in her words, this guy sounds weird.
All right, Suki, thank you for that great question. What's next?
Okay, so question number 2, also from Suki. Curt wrote an article in the Dummy's Guide, Read Philosophy to Overview of Propertarianism, called The Natural Law of Reciprocity Good, where he talks about reciprocity. I would like to ask, how can one from initial courtship to becoming an empty nester and till death do us apart ensure the establishment and adherence to these principles in every social interaction between two partners and their intended future absolute nuclear family unit to create the foundations for the establishment, preservation, and optimization of the family as an institution governed by these principles? How would such an absolute nuclear family be structured and managed if one was to structure the family around these principles across relevant dimensions? Consider relations between society, environment, the extended family, outside the family unit, preliminary factors, considerations of the properties and circumstances of oneself and any given potential partner at the time of courtship, impact of first impressions, the property of initial interactions, and courtship context, among others, all relevant because they are subject to past dependence, and consider these relations across time. Thank you.
Your problem is you're trying to apply reciprocity to dealing with a woman. I'd advise you to abandon such notions if you want to avoid a life of pain and suffering. Women have no intuitive sense of reciprocity and only ever practice it due to external incentives, which presently do not exist, or lifelong training, which is rarely provided anymore.
And Suki, did you know this was a landmine question? Martin is his usual clarity, which is relatively true. I'm going to restate it. When you're dealing with your children, are you engaging in reciprocity or are you engaging in parenting? When you're dealing with your wife, are you engaging in reciprocity or are you engaging in husbanding? And I think that's the mistake that is here. There's a difference between seeking reciprocity, and I'll get to it in a second, and seeking, which is a matter of exchange, right? You might be trying to teach reciprocity, but that doesn't mean that you either the woman you're marrying or the children you're raising are capable of it. It means that you're trying to develop them into it. And because we're all selfish creatures, children are very selfish creatures. Our whole problem is to teach them to be social actors and family actors and social actors, and eventually political actors, economic and political actors, so that they are engaged, they are applying reciprocity at larger and larger scales. Martin's going direct to the communicating the reality here. I'm trying to reframe it as I just have, but the underlying issue is the time horizon of cognition of the people you're talking about. Children have a very short time horizon. The distinction I make between women and men is that women are devoted and men are loyal. But that's the difference between in time and over time. Reciprocity can be considered an in time thing, right? It's a transactional issue. When you are looking at an intertemporal issue, loyalty or generating a reciprocal system, that's a different thing. And so it's very hard to hold women to reciprocity unless they've been taught it as children. And even then, it's not their instinct. Their instinct is in the short term, whereas the male concept of reciprocity is the long term. So when we use reciprocity here, we are talking about not only each transaction, but we are talking about the production of intertemporal preservation of reciprocity. And women do not actually practice that, and children certainly don't. They don't at all. And so that's that distinction is quite powerful. So in essence, when I try to write out the basics of men and women, the basic differences between the sexes, I usually break it into the predator male and the prey female. The predator has a longer horizon, and the prey has a shorter horizon. And from there, and that's just strength and vulnerability. And then I take it from there to women tend to work in the risk mitigation, hyperconsumption, short-term world, because they have to take care of children who are in that condition. And men tend to work in the relationship, family, and band and tribe or political model, which is the production of potential for persistent reciprocity by the systemization of it in a group of people. So yeah, Martin's right. You have to think about it as a mutually beneficial arrangement, but not necessarily a reciprocal one. Not because you aren't acting reciprocally over time, but that women will only act any semblance of reciprocity in time, and even then they will prefer to not act reciprocally. They will prefer to act hyperconsumptively.
Historically, normal and functional arrangement was if you're protector and or provider, then you're the boss. Reciprocity is for peers.
Correct. That was a very clear reduction, Martin. Thank you.
Individual rights effectively undermine the family.
Individual rights, when you are not the carrier of that responsibility you just stated, is the problem. Yes, they're not. You can't have reciprocity with your peers, and you can't. And individual rights are something that must be managed for people who are incapable of bearing the responsibility of preserving them.
All right, have we done this one?
Yeah, I'm actually kind of pleased we killed it, but then Martin stabbed it in the heart from the beginning. You know, it's so funny. I read these questions and I'm like, well, I can answer it during this long arc. And then Martin comes in and just goes, boink. You know? Like, okay, now we're now. Anyway.
Okay, so question 3 from Dex. How is P a revolution? What was lacking before that could have had the same impact? And what can we expect after it?
Great freaking question. I'm doing what's called synthesis. The revolutions in individual fields were from the previous generation, two previous generations. The most important one to me was the conversion of the concept of property, or we would console demonstrated interest, as a system of commensurability for behavior at L scales. And so that was an innovation that comes out of Rothbard and Hoppe. It's not formalized you can see it starting in Mises. You see it attempted more abstractly, but wrongly, in Rothbard. And you see Hoppe really sanitize it and simplify it to the system of measurement for all social interaction, is the reduction of all statements of social science to statements of property, or statements of preserving demonstrated interest, or statements of cooperation, and under the reduction of all human action to attempts at acquisition of something. So it was that hierarchy, which I'm not sure I know I stated, I'm not sure he stated it that way, but I think so. I think that's the way he would, if I said it that way, I think he would do his normal criticizing me for some reason, but then agree. That's number one. The second one was Hayek's insight in that informal institutions, norms, traditions, values, institutions were a form of property, right? That people defended and treated. There was no difference between private property, shared fractional property, and common property. That people always, and that all decisions could be unified under this measure. That was, I don't know how much of that's mine and how much of that's Hoppe's, because I can't remember anymore what I thought before and where we diverged, but I saw that. So so that's sort of part number one. Part number two is my use of, I'm trying to do whether Popper first or that one. I'm going to do computation first. So I came up in the era where I was very young, in the 60s and 70s, because I was born in the late 50s. So I was aware of these things called computers and fascinated by how they worked, and desirous of being able to talk to someone as rational as the computers that were promised, which is probably my primary motivation. And so I thought in terms of computability. By reducing to a system of commensurability like property, you essentially develop what is some variation of what we call computability, or at least calculability in the formal sense of the term, which means transforming inputs and outputs. But I saw it as the progress toward computability. The third thing was Popper and Kuhn's insights into the scientific method. And so Popper's insights were, unfortunately, he didn't get all the way. I mean, it's like each of these guys didn't get all the way, but they made significant progress. And Popper's insight was that essentially all logic is falsificationary. It's just an evolutionary Darwinian system of survival. And if it survives, that's just the best we can know, right? And so he reversed justification and falsification, which I thought was very important. It's similar to what Hume was doing in deduction versus induction, or his complaint against deduction. So if I look at those three things and I combine it with my historical fascination with Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration, American founding, and I combine that with my work in computability, in those three fields, and my work in trying to make law computable, which I built a very complex system for. And from that point, I just discovered the problem was not the problem was calculation, and calculation could only be solved by the thought model of economics, which is supply and demand. I sort of unified all those different insights, and so what this ended up with is what was really called, it's really meta science, but I don't like using meta terms, so I just call it unification.
A formal logic of grammar construction that unifies as disparate scientific disciplines.
Thank you. You did that better than I do it.
Well, I think you actually, no, I remember our conversation. The conversation you and I had was, I thought I couldn't find a term to describe it other than meta science, but then you corrected me into that, saying that this is a formal logic.
Yes. So we developed a formal logic that expressed language as measurement, the grammar as a system of measurement, an evolutionary system of measurement that would unify. And then the second part was the ternary logic that exposed the hierarchy of evolution as a single causal axis. And so once you have the single causal axes and the ways of talking about it, you get this system that we've developed that is a revolution. It's the revolution that was predicted by E.O. Wilson. He said, this is going to happen. He can see it on the horizon.
Wait, what did he say?
He said that, what is it called? E.O. Wilson's,
Wilsonian synthesis.
Thank you. God, you're wonderful. The Wilsonian synthesis, that we would see a unification of the sciences. What I didn't expect was this result, right? I mean, it made sense. I mean, you would think that through contraction and expansion of civilizations, right? But it's the same thing happens in knowledge. You would think that we would, through what I would call evolutionary computation and what Popper would call verisimilitude, you would think that we would discover the most parsimonious means of describing the universe capable by man. And I mean, for some, we seem to have got there. And so that's the real innovation. This innovation results in the production of decidability. In other words, it's not an opinion anymore. These factors are decidable. It just took a unification of all that into a funnel to unify it into a formal logic, which is a way of describing a science, right? It's a meta-science. It's the formal logic of meta-science, which allows you to describe universally compare, contrast, discuss, whatever, anything in existence. Certainly above the particle scale. Once we get below the particle scale, we don't know enough yet to get down there. I suspect that, like I've said elsewhere, I suspect that the people at Perimeter are right, that we are actually there, and we are just missing whatever it is that ties them together. So in any way, is P a revolution? P is a pretty big fucking revolution. It's in historical terms. I mean, if you understand in historical terms, it's up there with the Darwinian. It's up there with the Darwinian revolution. So it's just the Darwinian revolution applied to the behavioral sciences rather than just the biological sciences.
You know, I started following your work back in 17, 18. And I think even then, when you're still on Facebook, you said that this is the completion of scientific method. And at the time, I actually thought you were wacko, because like, what does that even mean? Like, how do you claim you complete a scientific method? And then I realized, well, yeah, it's just like years later, I realized, as I looked more into this, I realized, yeah, if you can, since what we achieved as a way of constructing grammar to measure even the abysmal sciences,
Yep.
It is a completion scientific method.
Yeah. So it's a big deal in historical terms, right? It's just that I'm not an academic looking for accolades from peers, right? I mean, that doesn't matter to me. I'm not even an author that's looking for accolades from the public. I want shit to. It's like Francis and I are 100% aligned on this one. I want to make a fucking difference. So, it's like I have the old lesson of from books to problems or from problems to books. I mean, it's from problems to books. We got problems and I want to solve them. So Pisa revolution, I just don't want to go. It sounds like it's about me when I do that, if I say shit like that, and I don't really, it's not about me. It's I don't fucking care. I don't need people to suck my dick. Right? I mean, it's about, can we make a difference? Can we make it happen?
It's clear that you have those libertarian roots, even if you chopped most of the tree down. Whereas I've recognized the whole soul as poisonous and looked for foundations elsewhere.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I'd like to understand a little better.
I mean, I've found a problem in methodological individualism and in this notion of supplying demand being automatically good. And I've found
you're talking. You do this. You're right. I understand. So the problem is, I'm trying to develop a science, right? And from that science, you can develop many different applications of it, right? Now, if I'm applying it in the Anglo model, I agree. And I think you're applying it in the European, certainly the Central European model, right? And it makes perfect sense to me, right? I mean, I don't.
It's not about who it's for. There are cumulative effects of the individual interactions, and you have to look at the whole thing instead of how two people interact. Otherwise you won't see the forest for the trees.
In the end, people exist. They actually are the actors. They're the ones that do things. So there's a difference between.
Just because like molecules exist, that's not always the proper level of analysis.
Well, no, I'm agreeing with you. That's what I'm saying. What level of analysis do you want to do? I'm worried about developing a science so that I can write a law, right? I mean, that's the simple, right? When the question is what law, and so where you and I differ is only in I'm trying to make that happen, and in Anglo, there isn't that much difference between in the Anglosphere. And what you're saying is if you take that science and you apply it to the condition of other countries, especially smaller ones that have a long and different tradition.
No, that's not the point. Even in Anglo countries, there are still emergent effects. Anglos are not immune.
No, I don't disagree with you.
The point about methodology applies equally there as here.
So let me flip it around on you. So do you think I agree with you with subsidiarity?
Well, you're less radical about it than I am, but sure.
Yeah, okay. So the point is, I think you focus on subsidiarity and I focus on the laws to make it possible, right? I don't, that's all I care about, right? Is that I want to focus on the laws. So I don't view these things as oppositions. I view it as as science and engineering, and you're interested in engineering something, and I'm interested in producing the science that makes the engineering possible. So it's what I object to is when I'm making a statement about the science, and you're saying this application demands these priorities in the application of the science, and I'm like, yeah, you're right.
I'm talking about differences, priorities, looking at individual interactions or looking at the whole thing.
Right, but only humans can act. So I look at law is applied to individuals. Rule of law must be applied to individuals. That doesn't mean that legislation must be applied to individuals. In other words, that doesn't mean legislation means legislation, constitutional, can be applied to groups. But if since only people act, I have to work with the science. I don't see us at odds at all. What I find at odds is when you say this is the wrong way of doing something, instead of that is true, but to apply that science, we need to take these factors into account and engineer solutions that actually achieve these goals. I agree with you. I just had to understand where you were coming from, because when it's just criticism, I couldn't understand. Now that I understand, I'm always trying to figure out how to get you what you want. It doesn't seem like it, maybe, but it is true. I love Martin. You don't know it.
I'm not sure law at every scale needs to apply to individuals. I could see it like us.
No, law. Okay. Law in versus legislation. I think
legislation is literally enactment of law.
No, legislation. Okay. The way I differentiate this between the two, law, i.e., i.e., how nature operates. It's you can think of it as.
That's not the origin of the word law, though. It gets back to commands.
No, that is what is laid down. That's the actual translation of the meaning. That which is laid down. What it means
by
is
whom?
Right,
by God or by men?
Isn't laid down commanded, really?
No, there's no command in Europe, in your Indo-European history. That you don't see it. It's all.
I think if we use the word law as an English tradition, then it should describe the how do you put it, Curt?
Law?
Yes, the something that's laid down as is laid. That which is laid down.
Right, and the meaning is to exist. There has to be some tradition that you opt within, right? And so that which is laid down, what it means is that is what is practiced, or that is what is agreed upon, or that which has come to. But it literally means that which is laid down. And so it's basically looked at as what are our traditions of dispute resolution, right? That's what law is. What are our traditions of conflict or dispute and conflict?
Right, but what I'm trying to say is that we should go with the English, since law is a word in English, we should go with the English epistemology, not the etymology of the word, right? But when the English encountered other cultures, since they did not have a word to describe authoritarian law of these other countries, they use the same word, and that's where the conflation comes from. The Code Hammurabi, would you say that the Code Hammurabi conforms to the English definition of law, or more of authoritarian law?
Great question. It is meant to be a canonization. In other words, Hammurabi was trying to end the creation of feuds between groups by differences in law, right? Or which we would call measurements. So what he tried to do was the same thing the Romans tried to do, which is create a standard between groups so that he could end the friction between groups who had different traditions. Because usually what would happen is the tradition in a group to outgroup would be hostile, whereas a tradition between groups of cooperating would not be. And so he was trying to lay this down so that there was less arbitrariness. The same thing happened actually in the Inquisition. That was the original purpose of the Inquisition, was to standardize the punishment, all right, the requirements and punishments, because what was happening in the courts was they were becoming arbitrary. So this is a common problem in history, but Hammurabi was trying to do the same thing, which is why he's so respected in history for having done so, not only for being the one we think of as the person who starts it, but because he was trying to he was trying to produce settlement rather than to issue dictate. Does that make sense? Yes.
Okay.
Right. He was trying to produce settlement. And same thing in Roman. When Romans said their concept of the common law was that they were trying to say, we have seen these tribes all do it this way. If you don't do it this way, you have to explain why not, because that's going to be the standard Rome is going to judge intergroup disputes by, is what's held in common. In the Anglo-Germanic tradition, very similar. But less complicated because the size of the princedoms. And they had the Holy Roman Empire to resolve issues. In England, it became a matter of I lost my train of thought. The harmony is, you're trying to produce harmony for the same reason. You had different factions because you had the old Bretons, you had the Anglo-Saxons, you had what was left of the Romanic influences, and then you had the Scandinavians, and then you had the Scandinavians come down into northern France, and then from France into England as the Normans. And so the Normans were trying to create two things. They're trying to seize tax and wealth from the Anglo-Saxons on one hand by the aristocracy, but then when they put their law in place, the tradition was to try to create harmony, right? Harmony or commonality between them. So in the Western sense, the common law is the discovery of commonality in dispute resolution among the different peoples. And so it's just empirical discovery of dispute resolution.
But at no point do you get around it being a command, which is you do this or you don't do this or you'll be punished.
The problem with command in the history of law is that it means arbitrary.
No, and also command. The law lays down consequences of what you ought not to do. Command, at least the way I interpret, means that's something you ought to do, the positive. And that's continental law.
So the way to look at it is a rule that's ensured, right, by force. And we separate command, regulation, legislation, law, and what we call natural law. We separate each of those. In China, the Western argument has been largely its command law. And that's because China had a very complex problem of unifying a great deal of people over a great deal of territory. And so they developed a bureaucratic class that specialized in actually trying to be good at law. And then the law was issued centrally. Similarly, continental law, different from common law, developed by the Napoleonic law. Continental law is really called Napoleonic law, as its origin is Napoleonic, is that judges could not be trusted in Europe as they could be trusted in England. And so they could not use empirical methods. And so instead, they developed a sort of head council that generates, they try to collect the information from it, and then they generate law. And at this point, France in particular is quite resistant to making law. They only enact legislation because they feel that there's no further precision of any value to be added to it. So this idea of law as command, it's better to do it the other way, is natural law, common law, legislation, regulation, and regulation is just how to enforce, how to bring about the enforcement of legislation, and command. So military command, right, is how to enforce whatever has to be done in this circumstance versus what is naturally occurring as a political order versus naturally what occurring as a social order versus naturally occurring as interpersonal order. Believe it or not, people these concepts exist, but in my review of academic institutions that teach law, they don't teach law. They teach lawyering, and I think that's the problem. And I think I wrote a couple of pieces about it.
They teach ways to subvert the system.
They do. They teach subversion. They don't teach law. The law was originally in the academic tradition in the West. It was theology, which was essentially moral law, right? Then there was then you could learn law, which was dispute resolution, usually over material goods. So it was a spiritual versus material. And of course, medicine, right? Which was those are the three doctorates you could get. That was it. And the problem, of course, is that law at that point was meant to be just like the priesthood or the medical business, the assistance of society in producing what they would call the king's peace, right? Producing peace and harmony in the population. And so what happened, unfortunately, during the Marxist revolt of the 50s and 60s was that that law became a means of activism in the production of positive law instead of a means of social harmonization and settlement. And that's partly because there's no way in Europe they have an administrative court which you can basically take up suit against the state, and in the U.S. we don't have it, which is one of the failings, I think, of our judicial system. It basically means lower court judges are incompetent in matters of this scale, and I think that's
I see what's going on in America, and I cannot be in favor of trusting judges much.
Well, I mean, you used to be able to trust them. You can't anymore.
Not anymore.
But was that sustainable though, or was that an inevitable development?
Right.
The way I see it, any human-built systems have entropy built in. The system that the founding father built, it lasted pretty good. It lasted a long time, and it's done pretty good, but it doesn't last forever. Nor should we expect it to. Hence, revolution. It's like hitting the reset button on your PC after Windows has deteriorated to such a state that it can't run stuff, which I had to do more than once. Shall we move on?
Sure.
Okay. Question 4 from Patriot BWC. Hey, Curt, will the upcoming books cover evolution and speciation of human subspecies, including inclusive fitness and kin selection, etc.?
Yeah, it's in the book we call History. That book is drafted. Surprisingly, since I drafted it, given the amount of information that's come out in genetics, it's almost not buried at all. So yes, in that book we cover it. It's really its primary message is that the distribution of humanity over history on different territories led to different first generations of neotenic evolution selection, which have made a huge difference in the populations. But there's also been, as you've seen, and I don't know if you've seen the work we've done on this, the video's out there, so you should be able to see it.
Which one is that?
It's the one that discusses group evolutionary, the evolution of group evolutionary strategies by the 10 variables or so that.
So one of your earlier, was the one of the earlier ones that you did by yourself, or was the one with Dr. Brad?
Yeah, it's one of the earlier ones. I don't.
Okay.
Is that
Yeah.
true?
I
don't know.
remember seeing it long ago. I just need to check where it is on the channel.
So
it's there.
Group evolutionary strategies. I mean, I can't remember. I know I wrote it before Brad was there, but I know that I went over it with Brad, so I can't really tell you. Yeah. Anyway. Anyway, so in that one, what I'm trying to do is show that the evolution of history results in group evolutionary strategies, and that group evolutionary strategies result in different rates of evolutionary computation. And that's why we are where we are now. It's a little more, it's a more sophisticated variation on, what's his name's, evolution, like the one guy who says it depends on what animals are in your Jared Diamond. It's more sophisticated than
Guns, Germs, and Steel. Yes. It is the video I found is on the channels, the Method 3 Intro to Group Evolutionary Strategy Part 1 and Group Evolutionary Strategy Geography Part 2. Published back in May of 2021. I will drop links into this video later, the video description.
What channel is it?
It's our channel.
It's Natural Law Institute?
Yeah.
Where's the search fucking button for it?
Great question.
Search across the channel. Okay.
You got to search for group.
Yeah, Group Evolutionary Strategy.
Yeah, because the title is actually Intro to Group Strategy, not Group Evolutionary Strategy.
Okay.
Search for group and you find it. And there's a third video, Method Part 3, European Group Strategy.
Yeah. So there's quite a bit of them in there. Okay, there's a lot in there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what the history is about. What I'm trying to unify is I'm trying to prohibit the Marxist, postmodern, feminist bullshit. I'm trying to counter the Hindu counter reaction, right? I'm trying to explain why civilizations evolve at different rates. And it's a pretty detailed history. It is focused more on European history because that's really what I'm trying to get to for that. Because my whole point is that Europeans, out of the 3 points of control, you could choose. Europeans chose law as their means of decision making rather than authority or religion, and since that happened, it's created a huge difference in our people's evolution. So, from the very step through to the expansion to now, law means what constitutes that law over time is crazy, but I mean, it's quite a bit of variation, but it always maintains sovereignty. That's because really you're talking about an aristocratic ruling system rather than the Middle East, which is a priestly or a bureaucratic one, as in China.
Sovereign is he who decides the exception, and it's the opposite of law. The exception.
Say again? What?
The law is what happens under normal conditions. That's the opposite of sovereignty.
No, so oh my God. When we're back to what are you talking about law? When you talk about law in under sovereigns, it's the same thing that happens with pirates. You can't have, there's no way to get power over anybody. So since you have no power over everybody, you have to come to agreement. So essentially, law is the means by which you develop decidability in a federation. I mean, or an alliance. That's all it is. So that's what we mean by law in the West. That law is the result of the agreement and contract.
What I see rather as real uniqueness of the West is much less resistance to hierarchy among men. It's our military that's unique. Whereas everywhere else, people just do the minimum they can get away with and to grab as much as they can for themselves instead of obeying orders.
It's the same argument, though. Same argument. I agree with you. You're right. What I would say is the West is organized and has always been organized as a militia, right, a military, and that tradition has followed us from this step forward. But then again, when you're talking about people who can't necessarily be forced into service very easily, and who often had to supply their own weapons, horses, chariots, whatever, you're talking about really noble families who specialize in you're right on aristocratic class of warriors, and that persisted right through to the world wars. What's happened since then is the replacement of that military hierarchy and authority with the bureaucracy.
All right.
Okay,
we got time for one more.
Sure, why not?
Question 5 from Lucas. Hello, friends. High school is ending in 2 months, and at the time of writing this, so I guess by now it's already ended. And I have to decide on what college path to pursue. I'm leaning toward engineering, but based upon a self-assessment via the 1926 SAT and AGCT 0.9G loading each, my IQ is within the interval of 118 to 120 with a higher edge on VIQ. Grades are good, study a lot, but as you know, you have spoken about how it is functionally impossible for anyone below this IQ of 125 to get an education as an engineer. Whilst there are other STEM alternatives available for the greater than 115, it does seem to me that engineering is the most practical, fun, and noble career an individual can pick. Deadly mistakes are also more likely to be discovered before causing any operational harm, and if not, are less severe than, say, a doctor's. Iatrogenic deaths are domestically third leading mortality cause. But it may be a bad idea to go into a profession where your comparative IQ is in the bottom quintile, especially with eventual AGI. With the neocortical lack of development of the adolescent mind, I cannot fully trust that my thinking is as rigorous and logical as the ego would like to suggest it is. As luck would have it, I live in a time of history's greatest scientific philosopher, legal scholar, and just like how it would be a dream to be able to ask Aristotle or Buddha for personal advice, it is a historical significant privilege that Curt is simply able to give out his own personal opinion on an individual. Whatever answer you give, rest assured I will possess immense gratitude. So my question will be, what recommendations do you have for midwits in pursuing truthful and hard science higher education?
It may be too late to answer this.
Well,
It may be too
No,
late
I
to
mean
answer this.
he's just going to college. You don't pick a major until at least when I was in school. You don't get to pick a major
Look,
until junior year anyway.
brain as a male, you can't really test your male's brain until 22 to 25. It's fucking pointless. If you're in that range, let's just say 120, you're within a half SD of the average of 125. That's fine. Besides the fact that anybody would ask this fucking question, it's not going to have a problem as an engineer. Right? I mean, it's just funny. I actually find it is sweet. The thing is, if you want to do it, right, and it seems right to you, you have sufficient aptitude for it. I mean, this is the first question you've asked. I mean, Jesus, dude, give yourself credit. Your IQ is probably gonna land if you're at that point now. Let's see, how many years it's 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 6 years. So you're likely to gain at least 3 points of IQ, if not 4. Yeah, you'll be at 125. Yeah, I wouldn't think about it. That said, you got to remember when I use these numbers, they're centers of a distribution. So if you have more interest and more conscientiousness than a guy with IQ 5 points higher, you're going to blow them away, because it's not just IQ. You have IQ, conscientiousness, and interest are equally valuable.
I was going to say, in hindsight, especially just looking at my own experience and mistakes, I think conscientiousness and what fuel you burn to get there matters more than IQ. Doesn't mean that IQ doesn't matter. Just I've tutored students who, despite how hard she works, I knew back then she wasn't cut out for comp sci. But I've also seen, goof offs, which I consider myself one, that just let his IQ squander his IQ. Because I don't work as hard as I think I should work. Certainly not as hard as Curt works. So yeah, you're
your IQ. You're a smart fucker. What's your IQ?
He's absolutely. Martin's got to be a one standard deviation higher than me.
If the test I did as a child is correct, then 145.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Yeah. That's about right. Anyway, so honestly, dude, go get your fucking engineering degree. Here's what I did. I went and got my engineering degree and decided it wasn't for me. Not because I couldn't do the work, not because it wasn't interesting, because I'm like, I can't work in this environment the rest of my life. The problems weren't interesting enough.
And I would even say, don't strictly think of, you get an engineering degree, then you got to work as an engineer, slave away in cubicles, whatever. I think that model is actually going away anyway, replaced by AGI. I think the biggest benefit of an engineering degree or training, being an engineer, even though like computer science kind of abysmal engineering. The serious engineers don't think computer science as engineers. It trains you in a way to think, a rigorous way to think, and that you can apply to anything in life, more so than a legal degree trains you how to lie.
Yeah, dude. You know what? We know enough about you. I mean, a guy at your age thinking the way you do, the questions you do, you're not going to have a problem with engineering. The question is, what part of engineering, or what application of engineering, or what application of thinking in engineering is going to interest you as you mature? It's not. It should not be a concern of yours.
And I would just add this, in the age of AGI, which, if we're talking about artificial general intelligence, maybe Curt and I differ. I just don't think based on the current LLMs, we're actually going to get there. Let's say in the age of very sophisticated AI that doesn't hallucinate as much as they do now, training your brain to think like an engineer, these are just tools that'll make you even better. Like think of them as sophisticated calculators and computers.
Yeah. I always look at it as engineering, computer science, philosophy, right? I mean, it's just where in that spectrum do you want to be, right? I mean, those are the three things. The problem with philosophy is you get a lot of people who study it who don't know anything. But if you look at the IQ points per discipline, they're up there in philosophy, and because the problems are fucking hard. The second thing about problems in philosophy are interesting is that they don't require other people's money. Which is one of the reasons I do it. I love computer science. I loved it. I loved everything I did in it because I got to learn so much about. I mean, if you're working on operating systems, maybe that's different. But in general, in applied computer science, you get to learn a lot about the world. The same thing with engineering. I mean, engineering has so many disciplines, across such a broad spectrum that, I mean, you get to learn cool shit about the world whichever way you want to go. And
Curt,
always.
Would you say that with the way AI is going, at least for the next few decades, rather than pursuing, say, computer science, maybe pursue engineering education that moves atoms versus moving bits?
Very hard to know that question. My thinking has not changed very much in that I think it's an amplifier. AI is going to be an amplifier. And I think it's going to amplify anything we touch. It's only going to be job eliminating at the very lowest levels, like, silly shit that people do and at the lower end of white collar work, right? Well, we think of it white collar administrative work. That's usually jobs held by women. I think there's going to be compression there, but in general, I mean, I can, everybody I know that works with code just means I can get more done faster than I could in the past. It does, right? And there's no shortage of shit that needs to be done, right? So I don't know. I have a hard time seeing this work out. Engineering and computer science are two different worlds, though. Engineering is more formal and requires capital. And so you're working in an environment with more people and more capital. And when you're in software, you require, until AI, you required less capital. And so you can usually make contributions more as an individual or an individual in a small group than you could elsewhere. And then the same as in philosophy, when you work in that end of the spectrum, you can work in law. Obviously, that's the canonical place for it. But if you work as a philosopher, which is what I do, it's really just yourself and a bunch of people you like to associate with and work with who share similar interests. So it's really it's actually partly which environment do you want to work in. It's pretty comfortable to work for a good engineering company. You'll make a good living. It's not going to go away, right? Computers are going to the difference in my lifetime I've seen. I was taught drafting on drafting paper, right? Right. And so now you do that all.
I caught a tail end of it.
Yeah.
So was I.
Martin, did you like it? Martin.
I mean, I sold some homework to classmates. That was nice. So I don't think you have an issue, Lucas. Just go with it. And if you decide that there's an area of something that's more interesting than you, don't get too hung up on it. I started in engineering. I transferred to law, and then I transferred to fine art.
and I end up doing computer science and philosophy. If I had listened to my professors who tried to get me to join the literature department and the philosophy department, I would have probably been happier in life, because I didn't understand how important it was for a professor to ask you to join the department, because I was just too much of a nerd. But if I'd have done that, I'd probably be different. But I don't have this thing of you start college and you know what you're going to do. You start college and you're like, for me, engineering was like, this is going to be boring. And I said, then I went into law and I said, this is going to be immoral. And I had to make the choice between philosophy and fine art. And since they're basically the same thing from two different perspectives.
Well, see, Curt, the difference between you and I is you came from a aristocratic family and with a history in business. So when you got in college, you had the agency and the wherewithal means to choose what you get into. When I got into college, my goal is essentially that of a skill training to get her family out of the lower classes. Because we came to the States, and I think at the time in the mid 90s, my father was making $8 an hour, which is just not that much above the what do you call it? Of the minimum wage back then. Even though he was a college professor in China.
Yeah, let me just correct something there.
He could have been another Jiang.
You're not. There's a difference between the economic class and socio-political.
Yeah, I get it. Mm-hmm.
Right. So you're not
socio-political class. My family has basically. We came from a long line of ruling Mandarin elite.
Right. Okay. So let's
cast low by the communists. Let's put it out.
Exactly. Right. So I view it as my father. My father was the most successful in politics, like my grandfather, but had made less money than his brothers. So you say which economic class you in? Well, I mean, we didn't have a lot of money, or we had middle class lives, right? But I didn't get taught ordinary middle class thinking, right? You just don't get taught. You didn't think like that in the family, right? Same for you, Martin. Well, how do we figure you out of this, right? You mean you just got a really good gene? You got a really good gene arrangement or something?
Martin came from a long line of executioners.
Just must have gotten lucky. At least on my father's side of the family, other than my father himself, there isn't much to work with.
Yeah. What about your mom side?
Seems to be all right there, but nothing of particular note.
Yeah.
I guess my grandfather was a filmmaker.
Well, that's cool. Now, can I ask this question? How's your mom doing? Does she has a new guy a relatively new relationship she's in? How's that going?
Maybe let's talk about that after we close the stream down.
I knew what you were going to say. I just wanted you to say it. Martin's a gentleman. All right. So have we killed this for the day, or is there anything else we're going to do? Because this is 9:15.
Well, I mean, I don't have anywhere to go. If you guys want to entertain one more question, we can. Or if you just want to hear, that's more than okay with me too. What do you think, Curt?
I'll do another one.
Okay. Another one it is. This is from Suki. For Curt specifically, but others can chime in. In general, what makes for a strong business idea? Please also base your answer on the acquisition principle. All human behaviors in the purpose of acquisition.
This guy is. We got to get this guy.
we should get him on the show.
We should
Or
get
in
him
the
on.
call.
He's fucking brilliant. And he dives into our stuff. I mean, it's amazing. He's just wonderful. This is a great question because I've been talking with my buddy Alex a lot lately because he's going through a challenging time with his marriage, and I'm like, I'm trying to be supportive. And his, he's a Stanford grad. He's, a CPA, all the other shit. He's a smart guy. He's got lots of ideas, very creative. But what makes a strong business idea? The interesting thing I have got out of our discussions is actually, what are you willing and able to do it? In other words, it's important to say, because the business idea you take, what are the dependencies? Can you do it yourself? Do you need the agreement of 3 other people, 5 other people, 100 other people? Do you need investors, whatever? So that's actually the part that I think is hard, that nobody ever talks about. It's like, when you're building a business, it's really fucking hard work. My friend Todd used to say, people have no idea how hard you work, and under what risk you work. He was talking to me about it. And so they don't have any idea what it takes to get to where you are. And so I look at it as it's really, and it's the same thing, like we're building Runcible right now. And I'm like, my big question is not, it's just, can I do it? It's like, okay, if I am these guys, I can do it. But on my own, I would think it's too hard a problem. So it's not just the idea, it's that you can do it. The second thing is, do you have a business idea or do you see a business opportunity? The tendency of the nitwittery is to try to come up with an idea and sell it, rather than identify a problem and solve it. And you'll see that most success comes from identifying a problem and solving it, not from dreaming up stuff that you think is interesting or cool or fascinating or that you would like to do. So what makes a good, strong business's idea is, do you see a problem? Is the problem have a market that you could exploit? Is it market one you could exploit and that other people won't initially want to? So for one of the techniques I use is I find there's a bigger company that is leaving behind this customer base that I can exploit until I can catch them. That's something I would do. But if I was trying to compete with them directly, I wouldn't do that. I would have to build up the company to the point where I can compete with them. My goal then would be either to overtake them or to have them buy us. So that's actually what, it's not so much the idea. It's that, can you figure out a strategy for obtaining revenue, customers, revenue, employees, what's the order? Customers, employees, and revenue, something like that. Can you find a way to do that you have a reasonable chance of exercising some chance of competitive value? Most people think they come up with a great idea. They don't. And you are talking to the guy who designed the software for those Ginsu knife commercials and stuff back in the day, which was a horrible experience. And a horrible introduction to the horribleness of what happens on late night television. But do we do that? Does that stuff happen anymore? Does that happen on cable anymore? Where you have these, like, people buy late night spots for their advertising?
Can't tell you. The only time that I've seen cable is when I'm in the hotel, which hasn't happened for a while. I don't own any cable that's suppressed cable whatsoever. So
I don't know, and then there's the channels that centralize on it. Like, I don't know what they're called. They're home shopping,
like maybe home shopping network or something like that.
Yeah, and that's the kind of place where you go with your crazy crackpot idea that, that has a $200,000 total market value that you can capture, right? I mean, it's just crazy. So they sort of turned the midnight commercials or late night commercials into a full channel. But I originally designed software for that problem, which I found very skeevy. The people were skeevy. I hated it all. Just not my thing. I was
This is
just
where the Ginsu knife thing came from.
yeah, it's the Ginsu knife commercial thing. It's just everything was skeevy. People were not good. I just didn't like it at all. Anyway, but there are people who love that shit, so fine. So when you say a business idea, what I would say is a business idea consists of an opportunity that you discover in a market that you could exploit with a competitive advantage that is not currently satisfied by someone else, that you feel that you have the cunning, hard work ethic, and capital and relationships to exploit. So I'm just going to bring up the one I'm thinking about now. My buddy has got I would never work this small, but he's got this idea for something that will help the construction management business, right? It's a great idea. Everybody needs it. It will work. He can produce it cheaply, sell it for a reasonable profit, and probably either grow it incrementally or flip the company to an acquirer, right? Great. It's a real problem. He's identified in the space that because he got involved in the space, and then he has used his available time and effort to produce a prototype that he can convert to an application all by himself and sell to the point where he can finance growth. Now, that's a very craftsmanly way of growing a business, and it's a very common one. I don't tend to think that way. I tend to think of how do I get players involved in this particular thing so that I have some sort of leverage and scale, and how do I and so I try to do things a little bigger. But that's just me because I feel able to do it, mostly because I think I can sell, I can sell refrigerators to Eskimos if I have to. And so I have a lot of faith in my ability to create a value proposition and convince people to buy it. Once I've identified a hole in the market that needs filling, and that is worth the price that I'm able to charge for it. So, I mean, I've generally built myself services companies. In other words, things where that have technology involved somehow. And I've generally built those, not always, but most of them built service companies. And I've done that because it doesn't require anybody's capital or anything. I can just go out and sell something and start hiring people. And once that project is underway, just keep repeating it until I've got $100 million company, and locations around the world, right? Whereas if some of the businesses have started, I looked at the art industry. I didn't start that one. We just brought in the first computerization to the industry, fancy cash registers and all this other stuff, and we end up selling half of the world, something like half of the world's art supply. You went into I did the similar thing in office products, and then I did the similar thing in legal research. And at that point, I was like, I'm going to go and build my own companies now instead of these shared businesses. And so I went off and did that. So it's just depends on what you feel capable of doing, and you should not get too enamored by wow, I enjoy this working by myself. What you're really doing is avoiding going out and capturing customers. There's a whole bunch of pitfalls, but the point I'm trying to make here is that find a hole in a market and fill it, rather than think you're going to come up with something brilliant.
Is it the truth that most ideas that you think are novel ideas, somebody else has already thought of and tried and failed?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's even, I can't think of anything that we've ever, I mean, for me, I've had the dream of what I want Runcible to eventually be since the late 90s. I've probably wanted it in my conscious and subconscious since the 70s, right? That's one thing, but how do you get there, right? If it's taken decades, right? So, but don't assume your great idea is really that great until you've tried to fucking sell it, because it probably isn't, which is really painful. Hey, did I answer that well?
Absolutely. I think we've done the audience justice.
Okay.
Martin, you got anything to add?
Nope.
God, I love that microphone. All right. Thank you very much. It's been Francis, Martin, and Curt for the Natural Law Institute. It's been Friday, June 5th, 2020. How did you get to be the 5th already? 2026. Please look in the description for the way to add your questions. It looks like we still have a pretty good backlog. No?
Oh, yeah, totally. We do. I guarantee you that we do. Because we have so far answered up to early March. So our backlog is now 3 months.
Okay, so we got, all right. That's why you're suggesting we go through more today. I get it. All right, so thank you very much for your attention. I hope you learned something. I had a great time this session. I only wish Martin and I had more time to go into the other that thing we started originally to see if we get more out of it, because I think that would be fascinating. But anyway, thank you all. It's been a pleasure.